or a chance maybe to get back from a dinner for their lunch. There we go. Hi, Laura. Okay, everybody. Yeah, hi. Right, welcome to this next our series of Lunch and Learns. Welcome, everybody. Sorry, yeah, we're a little bit light on numbers this week. I think it's just because I think we are in half term. And also, I meant to send out, I thought I'd sent out a reminder email to everybody this morning, but obviously it didn't go. But yeah, no, it's good to have you here, which is fantastic. And welcome, Sam, for coming and giving us this talk today on Outfall Safaris. It's brilliant. Sam's from ZSL. You've worked on Outfall Safari now for a number of years, as well as sort of like waterfall projects, if that's right. You've been with ZSL for 3.5 years. Yeah. And yeah, so Sam's going to talk to us a bit about the Outfall Safari project, which has been running now for a number of years. So it's a good opportunity just to hear about how it's been going and kind of the opportunities for partners and partnerships to engage with it. Just a quick bit of meeting etiquette and that. If you can go on mute, that's much appreciated. I'll try and remind myself to go onto mute. Obviously use the chat if you want to raise any questions. I'll try and remember. But best way to ask things is raise your hand, but there will be an opportunity at the end for a bit sort of like a Q&A session. So you can ask Sam some questions. Unless everybody's got any other questions, we'll get cracking on. Over to you, Sam. Yeah, do you want to take control?
Yep, great, thank you. Hi everyone.
Sam.
Let me just set up Teams presentation quickly. Right, hopefully you can all see my slides. Quick thumbs up if you can. Okay, great. Yes, so thank you for the introduction, Miles. I'm Sam. I'm a project manager here at ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, for those who might not know what that means. And essentially, a lot of my work at the moment is focusing around water quality and running the Outfall Safari. And I'm kind of going to give you a quick talk of kind of what it is, how we use it, and kind of the implications of the data as well. So for those who might not be aware, or who are aware of kind of, obviously you guys are aware, actually, being the audience you are, but obviously a lot of the focus a lot of the media focus gets attention towards kind of the sewage overflows, the CSOs, especially during the kind of the heavy rainfall where get the direct sewage entering the rivers. But kind of many people aren't aware, especially in the public domain, of actually, there's not just this one source of pollution that comes into the rivers. We have our more chronic issues with, basically our polluted surface water outfalls. So essentially, these kind of surface water outfalls are, typically drains from roads or from any kind of concreted area that is meant to siphon off the clean water, in inverted commas, directly into the river. And essentially, issues arise through misconnections, cross connections, blockages, and also failing assets. So, failing pipes, broken brickwork, that kind of thing. And this source of pollution isn't as weather dependent. It's kind of a background source of pollution that's chronic, sometimes low levels, sometimes high levels, and essentially occurs in areas where you have your separate foul and surface water network. So you have your surface water, which again, as I said, takes the rainwater siphoned off directly into the river untreated, and then obviously your foul water siphons off your grey water, such as sinks, bathrooms, sewage, all that kind of stuff goes off for treatment. And actually they reckon that about 3 to 4% of properties will have misconnections in a catchment. So suddenly there's quite a lot of chronic pollution entering the river without any, or prior to the Outfall Safaris, without any real understanding of how much and to what extent as well this problem is an issue. So looking at London, you can see the purple areas are the areas with the dual system. So you have your foul and surface water. And then it's only the kind of central London area that's operating with the combined system. So that means essentially the majority of London, within the majority of London, we have the option of having these polluted surface water outfalls. So, clearly quite a big problem to be addressing. So, yeah, as I said, so typical sources of pollution for these kind of misconnections and blockages and failing assets. So we have chemicals down the toilet. So people put bleach down the toilets, and if that's going directly into the river, then that's going to be a big issue. People washing their cars, pouring whatever chemicals they might be using that day down their drains, down the road drains, again, ending directly into the river. Even this year, I was out on doing a survey, and across or through an industrial site, and we found some really, we were there when the outfall was being polluted, and you could see the steam coming off the water because the water was hot. It turns out to be like a meat processing plant that was just discharging straight into the river. So clearly some really big issues. And again, you also have, as I said, oils, from roads, also rags. So any kind of physical product that's, flushed down the toilet or finds its way in, can end up in the river as well. And so, I mean, if you're looking at houses, so these images on the right, you can see, typical images of what a cross connection could look like. So you can see on the top right one, a number of pipes from the house entering the rain drainage pipe from the roof, and clearly that will be then leaving or allowing loads of chemicals to go directly into the river. And then the bottom two images are kind of your cross connection. So when the foul water is kind of placed directly next to the surface water drain, you can see there's a cap missing, which is allowing the foul water to kind of leak and leach into that surface water network. And this is typically how we see the signs of pollution during our surveys. So you have your cloudy plumes of water, as you can see at the bottom image, or you have your sewage fungus, kind of like the grey material that sticks to the side of the bank, or in kind of really serious cases, you can see long plumes of sewage fungus along the riverbed as well. And also you might be walking the river and seeing, if there's no CSOs in that stretch, you might still be finding kind of your physical products as well, and that's likely to be coming from misconnected surface water outfalls. So the Outfall Safari was created to kind of address this data gap. So where previously there was no understanding of the extent and the severity of this kind of form of pollution, it was kind of in the background, out of sight. In 2016, ZSL, working with partners from the Citizen Crane project, basically trialed out this methodology using communities, basically to kind of survey the whole catchment, map and kind of score and rank the sources of pollution they found coming from these outfalls. And there's a really good way to kind of engage local members of the community, not only kind of to directly capture the evidence of polluting outfalls, but also many of them will then go back and check their own appliances at home, because, as I said earlier, 4 to 5% of houses are misconnected within a catchment. So, those that might be surveying the river might also be contributing to the problem. But since 2018, this program has been funded by Thames Water, and essentially it's allowed us to expand the program to the whole of London, and we aim to survey each river on a 4-year rotation. So last year was kind of the first point where we could then resurvey a river that had previously been done beforehand. And about 70% of the data we provide, about 70% of the data that Thames Water use as part of their surface water outfall program comes directly from Outfall Safaris. So we're really contributing a lot of data that allows Thames Water to go out and kind of rectify these issues and kind of start that process of cleaning up the rivers through this source of pollution. So there's kind of 4 main aims of the Outfall Safari. So firstly is to systematically inspect and record the outfalls, so kind of mapping where they are, making sure we what the extent of the pollution is. Again, this is kind of to address the limited knowledge within catchments of actually how bad this source of pollution is. Secondly was to assess and report the pollution. So this is, the data goes to the likes of Thames Water, the EA, other catchment partnership members. Thirdly was just to kind of continue to build the evidence base and kind of get an understanding of the scale of this problem, because prior to this methodology there wasn't really an understanding of actually how big an impact polluting surface water outfalls were having. And then the last one is just raise awareness. So whether that be through members of the community who we train to do the Outfall Safaris, or through kind of wider policy work, and kind of that kind of thing. So actually, what is an Outfall Safari? I kind of talked about it, but essentially it's a citizen science program developed by typically a partnership of organisations within the catchment, so typically a catchment partnership, And basically, as I said, yeah, to kind of map the whole catchment or, subsections of the river that you're interested in looking at, to basically systematically survey and score all outfalls within that catchment. So you end up with a map that has a map that has all the outfalls located along it. This typically involves kind of two types of surveys. So you have your bankside surveys, so those conducted by the volunteers who go out within a certain time frame and kind of surveying the river where they can through publicly accessible pathways. And then obviously, especially in urban areas, not all sections of the river will be visible, not all sections will be accessible. So we have a period of in-channel surveys as well, which we go in after the volunteers and basically fill in the gaps. So where volunteers can't either see a whole chunk of outfalls or a whole section of the river, or where there's been big gaps in coverage because the volunteers, sometimes their plans change, they can no longer make it. And essentially, we typically have 2 or 3 days per catchment, just kind of filling in those gaps, walking in channel with waders, but essentially doing the same thing, scoring and mapping outfalls. As I said, the data is fed back to the local water company. In this case, it's Thames Water. And yeah, we provide a large chunk of their program, the data comes from Outfall Safaris. So as I said, quite an important source of information for them. And yeah, the data we collect is locations, the level of pollution. So we have a method where we kind of assess how to score the level of pollution, and also and kind of address the areas covered. So we might have found say 100 outfalls, but also we've only surveyed 50% of the catchment. So clearly there'd be likely to be other outfalls in the unsurveyed areas. So just kind of give an indication of survey effort. So what do surface water outfalls look like? So essentially, I guess they're in between your CSOs and your kind of land drains. So typically they're larger than 20 centimeters in diameter, and they can be quite irregularly shaped and also vary in form. So sometimes they're kind of circular pipes. Sometimes they're just you don't see the pipe, you just see a load of brickwork and kind of water trickling into the river from the brickwork. We have had some circumstances, for example, where volunteers have seen, these land drains. You can see that image on the right. They've kind of scored 20 odd of these pipes, and if you're not careful in being able to distinguish between land drains and outfalls, then suddenly your data load can be quite, the load to go through and check on data can be quite high, because typically land drains don't get polluted. We always say, though, if you do find sources of pollution from them, just record it anyway. But yeah, your outfalls will typically be larger and often have grates in front of them, or kind of metal caps that will kind of open up in high flow conditions. So the main component really of the most hands-on thing for us is the training of the volunteers. So we have typically a 2 to 3 hour training session where volunteers are trained in health and safety, how to score and rank outfalls, how to collect data, how to report the polluting outfalls to Thames Water. And this includes kind of like a scoring exercise, which allows the volunteers to really calibrate themselves of actually what they're looking at. Because one of the issues we find that sometimes volunteers, in their efforts to try and to get some polluting outfalls rectified or remediated, they can actually overscore outfalls, or even in some circumstances underscore. For example, because we check all the data that the outfalls submit, I've kind of found a few outfalls that were scored as 0, so indicating non-polluting outfalls. But actually, you go and check the images, and it was one that I kind of reported then straight away, because you could see large amount of sewage fungus. So there is an element to kind of checking the data as well. Another part of the training process is volunteers kind of choose a section of the river they want to survey. So we typically kind of print out a large scale map of the catchment, and volunteers can mark down on a map where they want to survey, and also when. We typically give like a 2-month window. Volunteers can go out in that time to map and record outfalls. One of the main kind of key requirements for that process is actually highlighting that, because this is a pollution source from a surface water drain, when it rains, obviously the rain will be siphoned off from quite a large catchment into an outfall. So we have to ask the volunteers not to go out within 48 hours of a wet weather event, because even a small amount of rain might wash away the signs of pollution we're looking for. We use an app called EpiCollect 5. So essentially, this is it's a free and easy to use app which we can kind of create our own survey and our own questionnaire, and it allows the user to kind of very easily log in and then kind of preload the questions. So when they're out scoring Outfall, they can just they can record photos, they can record the location, they can mark down areas where they couldn't get access to the river, and it kind of just really streamlines that process, that data collection process. And then once they finish their surveys, they then upload it to like an online server, which we can then access and kind of download. So yeah. So some of the signs of pollution we're looking for, I've alluded to it earlier, but essentially we're looking for RAG, so any kind of physical product that's kind of put down the toilet. You have discolored water, so any kind of large cloudy plumes of water, and then your sewage fungus, so kind of that kind of nasty looking grey. Sometimes when you see it in the water, it almost looks alive because it's sort of flowing with the current. So it's not particularly nice stuff. And often, sometimes especially when you're surveying in channel, you can often, for the bad outfalls, you can smell them before you see them as well. So yeah, some not so great stuff. Just thought I'd share some of the images from the last few years from London. So you can see here that one on the left, for example, is from the Wealdstone Brook, which is part of the Brent catchment. We did an in-channel survey there a few years ago and found some really nasty outfalls. Some plumes of sewage fungus that were extending along the riverbed for about 30 meters, so quite an extensive problem. And as I said earlier, like these outfalls were well outside of the view of the public. They were down kind of not culverts, but kind of concrete banks with no kind of access on either side. So no one would have seen it without the Outfall Safari. Yes, as I said, so we kind of, for each outfall, we have a two stage scoring, I guess, essentially. So we have the overall outfall score, and to make up that score, we have either the visual impact and also the aesthetics of the outfall. So we rank the visual impact kind of based on how far from the source of pollution is the pollution extending. So obviously, if there's no pollution, I'll give it a score of 0. Sometimes you see some sewage fungus that doesn't, you might see it along the river bank, but it doesn't extend along the riverbed. So you might give that score of 2 if it's within 2 meters, and that kind of then progresses all the way down to it extends a long way beyond 30 meters. We then look at the aesthetics. So actually, what is the pollution we're looking at? So again, 0 for no signs. Sometimes you might not see any pollution, but you can definitely smell like that kind of ammonia, detergenty smell, without any kind of actual visual signs. If you have a small amount of sewage fungus, then you give it a score of 4, and again that extends all the way down to either a large horrible smell, lots of sewage fungus, lots of rag, kind of a really big problem. And essentially, we combine those scores to give us a total. And part of the outfall process, we've kind of, while working with Thames Water, we've come up with an agreement that any outfall that has a total score of 10 or above would be reported directly by the volunteers to Thames Water. So essentially, they have an obligation in London to come out within 2 hours of that report to do an initial assessment. And then the volunteer kind of records that reference number that they get from them. And essentially, that kind of speeds up the process for the really badly polluting outfalls, and hopefully starts that process of getting them, fixed straight away, rather than waiting for us to finish the report and send the data to them. Those outfalls that are kind of lower scoring, so your 0s to your 8s, or more typically your 6s to your 8s, we produce a report, and I'll kind of go into a bit more detail in a second. But essentially, we send that data to Thames Water at the end of the survey season. So one of the things we've tried in the last year or two is to try and improve our ability to actually track outfalls and their behavior over time. So it was kind of prior to this outfall referencing system in place, it's really hard to actually track how outfalls behave over time, because all we're doing is recording location and the score. So if you're trying to compare, surveys of the same river between 2 years without actually kind of directly going through the images and kind of matching them up, it was really hard to actually compare how outfalls were doing and if they're being improved or not. So essentially, Thames Water brought in the system where each of their known assets has been given a unique reference number. And so as part of the training now, we've adopted the training to include this process of downloading, getting the volunteers to download What3 Words with this kind of data uploaded already. And so when they're kind of scoring an outfall, not only are they scoring the pollution status of the outfall, but also they're checking this map to see if the outfall they're scoring is likely to be one of the known assets. And if it is, then they can record the unique reference number. And essentially, that's the hope is that it's going to allow us in the future going forward to kind of really link outfalls between years and kind of assess their behavior over time. But it does come into some issues, and I'll kind of go through them again in a second. Yes, as I said, badly polluting outfalls are reported immediately to Thames Water and also the EA. And we kind of, at the end of the season, produce this report that shows, the locations of where we surveyed, where we haven't surveyed, gives us the locations of, the really highly polluting outfalls, the less polluting outfalls. And we've agreed with Thames Water to summarize the outfalls that score 6 or above. So those that are deemed polluting, but not highly polluting. And this just allows them to work, provides the information and the evidence to show that they are polluting, and kind of allows them to start to add them to their database. And again, we just send all this data to make it as easy as possible for them. But Outfall Safaris, they are a really useful tool, but they're not the silver bullet. There's kind of lots of limitations with them. So I kind of mentioned it already, but kind of there is a degree of subjectivity when recording outfalls. So some outfalls might record the same so some volunteers might record the same outfall differently and give it a different score. We do try and attempt to kind of mitigate against this by having that kind of classroom session of a test run to be given, like an exercise to essentially score different levels of polluting outfalls. And that kind of really helps at least calibrate them a little bit to what they should be scoring to what kind of level of pollution. But we do find that actually the problem does still persist, and we do have to kind of check the data as well. One of the main issues is that this is only a snapshot behavior of an outfall. So, you might be walking past and assessing an outfall at 9 o'clock in the morning, but by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it might be polluting via misconnection and a dishwasher has gone off, and suddenly there's loads of cloudy water. So an outfall that might seem to be clean actually might be a persistent pollutant, and unless we happen to come across it while it is polluting, then that data could get missed essentially. So it might underestimate actually how big the extent of the problem is, and that's a known issue, and that's why by working with local volunteers, we hope that once the Outfall Safaris season's done, they then at least know how to go out and what to look for, and if they do see their outfalls again are polluting, they know how to report it as well. Another issue we face is kind of a more practical one. So overgrown vegetation. So especially towards the back end of the survey, towards the latter months of the summer, any bankside surveys, you're going to have limited visibility when kind of surveying. We do the training sessions in March of each year and kind of give a 2-month period from March onwards to try and mitigate against kind of the vegetation element. But often, especially last few years with delays in rain and weather, it's kind of pushed the surveys back a bit. So it does become a bit of an issue. And sometimes that might kind of increase your workload as the manager of the program, because it means you have to do more in-channel surveys essentially. And again, not all areas are accessible. So, invariably a certain percentage of each catchment doesn't get surveyed because of, health and safety, or just unable to get into the river. Some areas are so blocked off, or culverts, it might be polluting outfalls under culverts, but you'll never know because you just can't get in there. And also, I guess the assumption as well that actually, we do come across some outfalls that are polluting with no clear evidence of the pollution. But we're assuming in this process that clear water is non-polluted water, and and it might not be. It might have all sorts of chemicals in still that we just can't detect through this method. So I thought I'd give you some stats from our kind of program from 2016 to this year. So in total we've served, well, I say we, the Royal We, largely through the volunteer effort, they surveyed about 700 kilometers. So that's huge distance considering I think London has about 600 kilometers of river, so quite good effort. 4,728 outfalls have been assessed, and actually we've trained over 540 volunteers as well over that time period, so some quite large numbers. I guess more worryingly is actually we found 598 outfalls that we deemed to be quite polluting, and actually 150 of those were deemed to be really polluting. So some areas in London particularly have a high level of 10 plus outfalls. And this is just a slide I've stolen from one of Thames Water's training slides, but essentially it just shows kind of the breakdown of when they do the house checks looking for misconnections. You can see what the biggest culprits are. So typically it's your washing machine or your kitchen sink as well. So that kind of just shows actually, a lot of these things won't be used throughout the day. So volunteers going out and kind of trying to record that snapshot behavior might miss a lot of these as well. And again, also, outfalls don't pollute equally across London. Some river catchments have particularly high or particularly large problems. You can see the Edgware Brook had the highest density of outfalls per kilometre, so about 3.8 kilometres. 3.8 outfalls per kilometre. But actually, thankfully, most outfalls are non-polluting. But between 2016 and 2024, 23% of outfalls were polluting. So, there are a high number, and we can see that especially in some catchment, it is going to be contributing to a large proportion of the pollution and kind of nitrate phosphate levels that we're seeing in the rivers as well. So this is kind of just another graph showing the same thing essentially, but you can see, the lowest outfall densities you can see in the Cray and the Shuffle. So, less than 0.01 polluting outfalls per kilometre. So that's quite good. But actually, if you look, I kind of wanted just to highlight the outfalls from this year. You can see how they fit into the general picture. Hopefully you can see the kind of labelling okay, but essentially if you look at the roading, for example, 2021 to 2025, you can see actually the number of polluting outfalls increased seemingly, and the same pattern for the Ingrebourne and the Upper Lee. Again, this is kind of hard to make a direct comparison because we don't, there's no, the extent, the survey areas don't overlap, in the sense of, some areas will miss 1 year compared to another year, and actually it doesn't really give a good picture of how individual outfalls are behaving. So that's why I kind of wanted to kind of highlight, being able to track individual outfalls is going to be a key element going forward. And this is just an example I pulled from the Ingrebourne. So in 2017, you can see here, there was some really badly polluting outfalls. So both these outfalls scored a 10. You can see plumes of sewage fungus, the plume of cloudy water. And again, in 2022, when I just after I joined, we did another survey, and again, the same outfalls, highly polluting, no change in that kind of 5-year period. And this was kind of only by accident I kind of noticed this. When you're dealing with so many outfalls, you start dreaming about them, but you kind of recognize a few of them. But then this year when we did the Ingrebourne, you can see, hopefully I managed to forget to take an image of one of them, but essentially they're both on the day scored a 0. So, if we had a system that allowed us to kind of record that data, it kind of give a better indication of how the catchment's behaving. But that being said, that bottom image, although it was scored a 0 on the day, it looked like it had been wet recently. So again, it might be on another day, it might have been a 10. So it's just one of those limitations that we, are aware of, but it's not, as I said, it's not the silver bullet. Sorry, just one last thing to add to that as well is one of the issues with the data set is how understanding how often, outfalls do become repolluted, because, with all the building works that's going on, all the development, and kind of people are doing up their houses, you know, there's always risks of new issues coming online to outfalls that may have just been fixed. So, you know, if we can start to understand the misconnection and re-misconnection rate, that'd be quite a useful bit of information as well. Yes, as I said, it's kind of, the data has a really, you know, good potential to be quite impactful. But yeah, there are issues surrounding the accuracy of kind of the asset locations and labeling them. You can see this kind of little table that I pulled out from one of the reports. You know, a large chunk of the Thames Water reference numbered outfalls in a section were missed by staff and volunteers because either the outfalls aren't there anymore, or they were missed when conducting the field survey. So, you know, it's going to take a long time to be able to build up a quite accurate data sets. And also issues around actually how do you make this data impactful and kind of really kind of use it to its you know, highest ability, really, because at the moment it's kind of just sat there. But the next few slides, I just want to kind of essentially highlight some of the examples that Outfall Safaris data has been used for. So the Mayor of London put out a call to kind of evidence and provide ways of how to address kind of pollution, and actually Outfall Safari and the data it provided was, you know, an integral part of actually evidencing the source of pollutions and how it might be rectified. And, you know, a number of recommendations from this source of pollution were given to the Mayor of London and the GLA to hopefully, as they kind of work towards this 10-year plan for the clean and healthy waterways, you know, more resources will be allowed to come to, you know, the program, and kind of providing potentially like a new position to, you know, speed up the rectification process that often sits with local councils and, you know, their lack of capacity to deal with enforcement. And I think one of the more recent major things is actually Outfall Safari has now become an official audited method for Casco. So essentially what that means is it's going to be rolled out nationwide. So there's been new guidance come out that essentially allows any new partnership, catchment partnership, or organization who want to kind of conduct an Outfall Safari, it gives them all the guidance they need, and it's also created with the help of cartographer, a new app and a database to kind of really centralize that data collection, and will allow us to build a better picture naturally of how much of an impact, I guess, outfalls are having, polluted surface water outfalls are having across the nation. Because at the moment there's kind of piecemeal efforts here and there, but no kind of integration of the data. So that's some really good news recently, actually. You know, guidance. So if you do want to, I should have included a link actually, but if you look on our ZSL webpage or on the Casco webpage, you'll find links to that document as well. Yes, I just want to highlight as well that actually, you know, I've mentioned the SWAT program from Thames Water, but, you know, the data we provide does allow them to do their work, or does kind of help them do their work, I should say. And, you know, it can make quite a big impact as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. Hopefully that video plays. It's just kind of a recent example of that, the example I mentioned with the abattoir and the meat processing unit. Kind of, this was them washing down their site, and you can see that the water came up, and we had some really high readings of ammonia and high temperature readings as well. So clearly a massive issue. But yeah, any questions?
Great, thank you, Sam. That was really interesting. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, questions. Mark. Oh, I think you're on mute, Mark. Oh, Mark, you're on mute.
Start again. Apologies for being late, by the way, as well. Fantastic work, Sam. Really, really excellent. I suppose it's, rather than a question, it's more of an observation. I mean, it's fantastic also that the Crane shuttle have the lowest incidence of pollution outfalls or whatever. However, it's kind of, I just thought I'd draw your attention to the Danson Stream, which is a tributary of the Shuttle. Most of it is in a culvert, so it's inaccessible, but there's been a number of pollution incidents on that particular small section of stream that feeds into Danson Park Lake. I mean, the Thames Water are aware of them. I mean, recently there was quite a major fish kill on that stream. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because obviously, eventually the water from the Danson Stream will flow into the Shuttle and hence the Cray. So, and it may have been missed during your survey work, especially by volunteers.
Yeah, I think it's yes, I guess Outfalls are kind of looking for the designed to kind of locate the points source locations of the outfall. So if they can't find the source of the pollution, which I guess if they're looking down and further down the shuttle, they might not see it's coming from this stream. But I guess the main thing here is Thames Water are aware of it as well in the air, presumably. So
Sure, yeah.
I guess I think it's not like a problem. It's not something that an Outfall Safari would pick up, I don't think, because they wouldn't be able to see where the pollution is coming from. But I think working with communities, that's why it's so important, because they'll be able to get their eyes on, I guess, more closely.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Isabel, I think you were next, and then James.
Thank you. And yeah, that was a super interesting talk. Thank you very much. I just had a couple of questions. The first one was, you showed those pictures of the outfalls and then the land drain.
Yeah.
And how do you tell the difference between them? Because they looked very similar to me.
So I think typically land drains are smaller in diameter.
Okay.
And often when you're seeing them, they're kind of regularly spaced along a concrete bank. So I think that's the main thing really is if they're small and regularly spaced, then you can presume it's a land drain. I always say to volunteers, if you find a small pipe on its own, then probably record it if it's just a one-off. But if a volunteer is kind of walking along a concrete bank and seeing 20 of them, then I wouldn't bother with that kind of thing, because outfall pipes tend to be a bit bigger.
That makes sense. And then the other question was, and I guess this is more in the Thames Water side, but how do they, once you've identified the outfall, how do they then go about finding out where the misconnection actually is?
So we'll provide them the location of the outfall, and especially if it's a polluting one, then they'll have a team out that will go and basically, through various methods like dye testing, cage traps, cameras, basically trace it up the pipe and kind of work out what catchment of houses are kind of contributing to that problem, and basically follow it to the source essentially. So that's one of the things is a project for one outfall can be one house, or it could be 20,000 houses. So there's no indication of how big that problem is until they kind of start the process, and that's why volunteers sometimes rightfully so get frustrated at the time it takes to kind of rectify these issues, because sometimes it can be huge. So I think it can be a lot of work kind of tracing the source. Whereas this one, the video, for example, was quite easy. The EA went out and were able to quickly identify actually it was this one business that was doing this kind of regular polluting event. So
Okay, great. Thank you. James?
Thanks, Mars. Can you hear me right, Sam?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, thanks so much, Sam. Amazing presentation. Really, spectacular to see the scope of the work you're doing, but also sort of the scale of the problem. I think we're hoping perhaps to do similar work in a smaller, more rural catchment, and it's not necessarily the same extent of other works happening in our area to investigate septic tanks. And I'm wondering if you need water company buy-in locally. So it would still be Thames Water, but I've seen sort of very complex process diagrams showing sort of all the stages to actually get these outfalls resolved as the final step. And I don't know if that needs dedicated local teams, or if this is something that you could start doing at a smaller scale, just identifying them and then pitching to the water company without that already in place.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth going out and mapping the the pollution and the kind of, I guess, the entry points for this kind of septic tank issue or other issues, because then at least that's the data you can hand to them and say, okay, this is the problem, let's work through it, kind of thing. Because I guess they can't deny it, then there's a problem if the data's there. So I would always, I definitely collect the data. And I think I'm just trying to link it now. For example, in the rollout of the Outfall Safaris, we were in Manchester doing some training sessions, and essentially the catchment partnership there were ready to collect the data. But there was a thinking, because the water company wasn't ready to do it and they weren't sure what they were going to do with the data, this kind of hesitancy to actually start the process. But we basically said, just, go out, the protocol to do it now, go out and collect the data, and then essentially work with the companies, and you have the data then to kind of provide for them and show there's an issue that needs to be fixed. And I guess it's probably, I'd do the same approach in your circumstance.
No, it's good to know it's still worth collecting it to be able to get that going.
Yeah. No,
I guess you can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
To a degree, you can start making smaller fixes by working with the community, even if it's not going through the TEMS processes on misconnections. And we might sort of drive a bit for septic tank improvements in the area, work a bit one by one. You mentioned dye tracing as well as a sort of way to fix or to identify individual ones. Have you found sort of testing water quality, or just physically adding dye, or sort of continuous monitoring, fluorescing, tracing, that sort of thing? Has any of that fed into the work, or has it all been bankside and then visual surveys?
So I actually personally haven't done any of that dye testing stuff. That's kind of more the Thames Water team once they go out to do the investigation process. So yeah, I can't really answer that. Sorry.
Cheers, Sam. So I'm being cheeky and getting a second question in there.
No, that's all right.
That's all right. Chance of one last question. Helen?
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thanks, Sam. I think that was a fantastic presentation and a really lovely demonstration of kind of the value really of citizen science to support river management. So thank you. My questions were actually more about like logistical, in terms of how long does it take to train the volunteers, and how long does it take, like if you do an Outfall Safaris, say for the crane or for the hogs mill, how long does it actually take to get that coverage?
So the training session is a day, 3 hours, 3-hour session in person normally. Obviously there's preparation time and getting the location organized and kind of advertising it to local communities, that kind of thing, which can take some time. And then in terms of the time to actually do the survey, so we basically give like a window, like there's typically 2 months from the end of March, that volunteers can go out in their own time. So it's not like an activity where, for example, I need to be with the volunteers to do the survey. They go out in their own time, and they can do, say they've chosen a kilometre section, they can do 500 meters one day and then 500 meters a week later. There's no restrictions that way. So so it's kind of, we don't really measure how long it takes, I guess, beyond the fact that actually because of the weather we've had to extend it. So I think we were still getting data from volunteers maybe in end of July this year, and then we did our in-channel surveys in August, September time. So it's kind of, it can be as long as it needs to be, if that makes sense, because we have to be quite flexible with the rain and stuff.
Right. And do you give each of your volunteers like a particular stretch to do? Like, how do you make sure you have that kind of complete coverage?
Yeah, so what I typically do is print off a big map of the catchment with the river clearly highlighted, and then they kind of annotate it with their names. And essentially I digitize that, and then we have like an online platform. We use a thing called Padlet. Essentially kind of people can sign up to it and they can see when we give updates. So when the volunteers going out, they kind of record on the app their start and end point. So we know, even if they haven't found any outfalls, we know where they've surveyed, and we can then block that off as completed. And basically through that 2-month period, we kind of slowly build up an image of which part of the river has been finished, which still needs to be done, and actually where we might need to do in channels because volunteers haven't been able to access that river. So it's quite GIS heavy and essentially kind of just managing that project.
That's great. Thank you very much. And is it okay if I just sneak in one quick update? Because I think that the Outfall Safari is now live on Cartographer. So it's possible to complete the surveys there now and it ought to be stored. So sorry, I just thought I'd get that in.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. And Sam, really appreciate you taking your time here.
Sorry, thank you for having me.
It's really good, and I think everyone's really appreciated it. So it's great stuff. The presentation will be and slides will be available on our website shortly, probably in the next couple of days once we just edited it. But yeah, no, thank you very much, everybody. I think the next one's coming up in December. I think that's on BNG. I think I need to go check the schedule, but I'm pretty certain it's BNG. So yeah, we will send out invite. Well, you should all have the invites in your diary, but we will send out reminders. Brilliant. Thank you all so much for your time. Yeah, really appreciate it, and have a good rest of the day. And thank you so much, Sam. It's great stuff. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers,
have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam.
No worries. Cheers, guys.